So who is Julian Assange, and what will be the lasting impacts of his standoff with two of the world's most powerful governments? Glenn Greenwald joins me now from Rio de Janeiro to shed more light on the latest developments in the Julian Assange story. He is a former constitutional and civil rights attorney and is currently a columnist at The Guardian, and he's written extensively on Julian Assange and WikiLeaks for the past 2 years. Glenn, thanks so much for joining us here on The Heat. Let me ask
Good to be here.
Let me ask you the obvious question. I always say that nothing is ever really black and white. Generally, it's gray. And we have these two running narratives about this man. One is that he's difficult, he's a megalomaniac, he's a traitor, he's treasonous. The other is he's a truth teller, a champion of honesty and truth, and really this great champion of transparency. I imagine the truth probably falls somewhere in the middle. How would you describe him?
Right. Well, he's a human being, so he's neither pure evil nor pure good, like all human beings. But it is true that over the past decade, there have been very few individuals who have been willing to sacrifice their welfare and their security and their liberty and even their life to stand up to what is this incredibly sprawling and opaque wall of secrecy behind which the American national security state functions. And what Julian Assange has done is what media outlets in the West say they're supposed to do and claim that they do but don't, which is bring transparency to the world's most powerful factions. Is he a difficult person? Does he have personality quirks? It depends on who you talk to. I'm sure, like everybody, he has some personality flaws. It's certainly been magnified by the fact that a number of governments around the world openly debate whether he should be murdered or imprisoned for life. That would intensify all of our personality flaws. But I think what really has made a mark on the world is this model that he's created for transparency to shine light on what people are doing who exert great power. And for that, I think he is owed a lot of gratitude.
Well, you've talked to him quite a bit, so get us inside his head. I mean, how does he describe what WikiLeaks is all about? I mean, is that the crux of it? He just wanted to basically pierce the veil, so to speak?
Yeah, I mean, what he would say is that, and has said before, is that media outlets are supposed to be the entities responsible for uncovering secrets, for preventing power from being exerted in the dark for all the reasons that we're all familiar with, that when it's exerted in the dark, it gets abused, it becomes authoritarian, it acts without accountability, and yet media outlets have become basically complicit with, partners of, the world's greatest power centers rather than adversarial checks on them. And people inside government who want to leak important and secret information can't even do it by giving it to media outlets, because oftentimes these media outlets won't even publish it because they're afraid of offending or alienating their partners in government. Sometimes they will, but often they won't. And so what he wanted to do was to create basically a model of radical transparency, so that based on the theory that the more light that shined on people with power, the better. And he set about doing that by creating this sort of stateless organization that wasn't subject to the laws of any nation, that didn't have allegiances to anybody, that didn't even know the sources of the information that that were giving them the leaks, and therefore they couldn't disclose it even if they wanted to. And it was this model that really, brought the world huge numbers of scoops, more so than all media outlets combined.
Action, reaction. He must have known there'd be a reaction. Was he surprised at the level of condemnation and kind of how things have spiraled out of control for him?
I don't think so. I mean, if you talk to Daniel Ellsberg, who probably before Julian Assange was sort of the symbolic face of whistleblowing in the United States, I mean, he had his psychiatrist's office broken into on the orders of the White House in order to find as much incriminating psychosexual information about him as they could in order to destroy his reputation and make him toxic and radioactive so that nobody would be willing to defend him. A campaign of complete destruction led by the Nixon White House. And what Assange has done is something on a much greater scale, and so he certainly knew that he was provoking the world's most powerful factions, and that they were going to come down on him very hard. And I think that's what makes his actions courageous, is that he did it knowing he was sacrificing and risking great personal harm to himself in pursuit of a cause that he believed in.
Personal harm, there are a lot of people who say that he put real human lives in danger by putting some of this stuff out there. Isn't that, I mean, that's a legitimate concern here. Isn't there some kind of a border where you shouldn't cross in terms of, I mean, it's one thing to get transparency out there, but if you're really putting human lives at risk, that's another issue altogether, isn't it?
Sure, but I think there's a couple things to note about that. One is there's not a single documented case where any individual has been harmed as physically or lost their lives or anything like that as a result of WikiLeaks disclosures. When the diplomatic cables were first released, or rather the Afghanistan war documents were released, the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and the Secretary of Defense came out and said WikiLeaks has blood on its hand, but later media organizations documented that there's no evidence that anything like that has taken place. They were a little bit reckless at the beginning with letting names through in their disclosures that should have been concealed, innocent people who were informants or activists, and things of that nature. They're a new organization. They're far from perfect. They made mistakes, but they've been much more scrupulous and much more careful about making sure that any names of innocent people are redacted from their disclosure. So they believe in radical transparency, but recognize that in certain cases, secrecy is warranted to protect the innocent, and they followed that fairly faithfully.